So the title of my talk is The Birth, Life and Death of the River Mole. For my next trick, I'll try and get the next slide. Yes. Acknowledgements, first of all. Denby's Winery, for a variety of reasons. Martin Cox Walker, a colleague of mine, Al Fraser, at Imperial College, and Schlumberger Well Services have contributed in various ways to this talk. To begin with, perhaps, what is in a name? How does the River Mole get its name? Well, you pay your money and you take your choice. For Mulazeg, Old English for Mull's Island, recorded way back in 672. Emelin, Old English for the River of Mills, because in the Doomsday Book there were so many mills of it. The one I think most people are familiar with was originally in the literature in Camden's history, 1586, betakes itself to subterranean passages like a mole, which is very apt, as all locals will know. Okay, just to get us started, this is the basic geography of the River Mole and its immediate hinterland. The Mole rises down here on the edge of Gatwick Airport, flows here through the Mole Gap northwards and joins the River Thames at Molesey. It has various tributaries like the Pitbrook. It cuts through the chalk gap of the North Downs here, and then the other big ridge of hills, the Surrey Hills, comes through here with a valley, the Holmesdale, in between. Now, this is a geophantasmogram to give you the very essence of the local geology of Dorking. You probably know all of that without realizing it, I think, but it's important that you're comfortable with this if you're to enjoy the best of the afternoon. All the sedimentary rocks around us are sands and clays and limestones laid down stratum after stratum after stratum in shallow marine, alluvial environments, all sorts of different environments. The base of the section we're interested in is the wheeled clay to the south of us. Then we have the ridge of the Surrey Hills made of the lower green sand. That's overlain by the Galt clay, a marine clay which erodes out in the Holmesdale, and above that is the chalk. Hawk-eyed people will be saying, so where is the upper green sand? The upper green sand is about there, but it's only about 2 meters thick, quite important economically, but I didn't bother to show it. So that's the basic picture, and this is the hinterland that I'm going to be talking about. Now, this is rather fun. Now, you can work out already, I think, wheeled clay, the green sand of the Surrey Hills, the Galt clay valley coming through in here, the chalk of the North Downs. This is the Mole Gap. That's the Polson Lacey Valley, Headley Valley there. And to the northwest, that is the London clay overlying the chalk with a big unconformity. Now for my next trick, if this will work, and I don't know that it will. I wonder if that does. No, it doesn't. Mark, can you go over to the screen? Yeah. This is the advance, and down bottom left there'll be a little bar to set the movie moving. No, on the screen itself, or get the cursor on the screen to the bottom left. Keep going left. Keep going left. Up a bit. Up a bit. Down a bit. You see a bar there and a V on the left. Click on the V. This is worth waiting for. Look at that. Isn't that fun? Good. Wow. Thank you.
There goes mine.
And we've got another one I'm going to ask you to act on that. Thank you. Okay, so my talk is divided into 3 parts: the birth, life, and death of the River Mole. So let's start, obviously, back in time at the beginning. And this is what geologists call a paleogeographic map. The great thing about geology is the language, you see. This is a map of what the Earth's crust around Northwest Europe was like about 70 million years ago, in the days when the Cretaceous chalk was deposited. So you see there an outline map of the British Isles, an arrow to point where the Mole Valley is, and we had a marine environment, and chalk, a very fine lime mud, was deposited layer after layer after layer over many millions of years. And they were all obviously deposited flat, stratum on stratum. Here's a polychromatic geophantasmogram, and you don't get many of those every day of the week, to show the evolution of the mole anticline, or rather the Wealden anticline. We start at the bottom, end of the Cretaceous period, some 60 million years ago. All the layers, all the beds, absolutely horizontal. Then the Earth's crust domed up, and a huge arch, known to the learned as an anticline, developed across the Weald, with strata dipping north off to the right towards what was to become the River Thames Valley, and dipping south into what was to become the English Channel. And over millions of years, erosion took place. Inland facing scarps developed. Rivers drained north into the Thames to be, south into the Channel to be. Rivers drained down the axis. Over millions of years, erosion cut through the chalk, through the Gault clay, down to the greensand ridge, forming the Surrey Hills. And they, in turn, those scarps gradually retreated north and south towards the present situation where they are today. So that's where the river mole is. If you can see all of that, the river mole draining northwards. And then we have other rivers like the Wey to the west of us, all with their own gaps eroded down through the chalk scarp. So that took place, obviously, over millions of years to take us down to where we are today. Now, oh, this one is working without you. I'll do this twice. Just, I won't say a word.
What?
Isn't that wow? Yeah. I don't really need to talk about that. I think it's self-explanatory. Well, I will say a little bit. It's a cross-section, a vertical slice through the Earth's crust, computer simulated. To the north, this is the North Downs, London, the Thames Valley is off here. This is the Weald. There's the South Downs going off to the English Channel. So these are Weald and Lower Cretaceous sediments, and we go down progressively older. That's the chalk, Weald clay, down into the Jurassic strata with the Kimmeridge clay, right the way down to Triassic and Permian rocks at the floor of the basement. And that's the type of display that geologists use. And I hate to talk about oil, but that's how we work out how and when the oil forms and when it migrates into the traps for us to find and ruin the planet. But that's the sort of thing we do. And that's a very nice illustration to give you, in a nutshell, the evolution of the Weald. And here's another version, and I hope many of you will have seen this. Now, the thing is, you are, in this audience, you are all locals, I believe. Jonathan, how many have we got zooming in now? We've got 20 people around the country who are zooming into this meeting. So they won't have seen this. Most of you have been to, I sincerely hope you've been to the Denby's Vineyard. And this is another one of these little movies. I'm sorry, Mark, I'd forgotten about this one. You should be able to press a button, I think, to get this one going. Yeah, you can see where it is. Sound as well.
So how was this terroir created? Chalk is made up of microscopic skeletons of plankton that died and fell to the bottom of the sea in the Cretaceous period, over 60 million years ago. Here at Denby's, the chalk is laid down over layers of Gault clay and green sand. The chalk was originally horizontal, but has been folded into the Surrey Hills by continental movements over the last 30 million years. Rivers were formed as the rain ran off the hills to create valleys between the North and South Downs. It is the River Mole that formed the valley here at Denby's, leaving south-facing slopes of exposed chalk, a perfect terroir for growing vines.
Good. Thank you, Mark. You can sit down again now. That's the last time I think I'll ask you to do that. So that's rather nice. That was Martin Cox Walker put that together for the Denbies film, which I hope you've all seen. If you haven't, then you certainly should. Okay, so now I've talked about the birth of the river mole. So we're now sort of bringing ourselves up to almost modern times on a human time scale. So what's the life of the river mole? What's actually happening and going on now and in the recent past? Okay, so you're now comfortable with that slide. We're going to be concentrating on what's actually happening in this area in the mole gap here. And we'll also look at what's been happening a little further north towards Leatherhead. You've seen the geological map, the basics of it, but I just point out the main features again. There's the green sand. There's the green sand, sorry, there. The Gault clay in blue. These are the various units of the chalk. This is the river mole, the modern floodplain meandering through the mole gap. And on either side, there are river terraces. There are raised banks on each side of the main river. And one can identify and map a lower river terrace and an upper river terrace. And Mark, I think, will be talking more about these. We find these river terraces, many rivers around the country. This is a cross-section through the River Thames, where they've been very extensively studied, where they can recognize successive river terraces cut into the river valley, into the floodplain, alluvial sediments deposited, and then the base level changes and erosion takes place. So terrace after terrace after terrace forms. And these are all very young geologically. These are all taking place in the Ice Age, in the alternations of the warm and cold phases. Now, as your locals, I take it that you have all been to Dorking Museum. If not, you certainly should do. The museum has the most fantastic collection of fossils from Lord Ashdown's collection up at Denbies, of Cretaceous and younger fossils, very good collection of Ice Age fossils. What I'm showing on this slide is from Dorking Museum. These are bones of a mammoth recovered from one of these alluvial floodplains in the Ice Age. And there is, as if you needed me to tell you, there is a mammoth. Likewise, we find flint instruments scattered in these gravels, and there's one here, and the real one is on the display there. These were made by hominins, pre-Homo sapiens, this type. And these boys and girls, or guys, as they all would be today, were coeval, living at the same time as the mammoths in the Ice Age, in the relatively warm phases of the Ice Age. Putting that evidence together, we know that the North Downs looked something like this in the Ice Age. The glaciers never got as far south as Dorking. And one of our members put together this way of looking at it. If you had stood at the top of Box Hill at the last glacial maximum, because the ice advanced and retreated many times, the last big ice advance, if you looked from north from Box Hill, you would just see the northern end of the ice sheet about where the River Thames is today. And that was an ice sheet that extended continuously right across Scotland and all the way to the North Pole. But we, Dorking, were on the edge of that. So we had these hungry, hairy hominids wandering around and the mammoths and so on and so forth. But the Ice Age, though we didn't have ice here, we do have a lot of erosional and depositional features which relate to that periglacial climate. And Mark will be talking about that afterwards. Now, cross-section, you should be quite comfortable with this. But I want to bring in another aspect. This is the wheeled clay down here, which is impermeable. Overlain by the lower green sand, which is a nice porous permeable sand. That's where a lot of our water comes from. Red Hill, the Gault clay, is impermeable. Chalk is another aquifer. That's also where we get our drinking water from. And then the London clay is impermeable. So we've got two rocks there which store up large amounts of water. Now, that's the same cross-section, but not quite so arty-farty. But what I want you to notice there, and I think my battery is now, oh, it's working again. The line of the swallow holes is in the mole gap itself. That's the water table. Here in Brockham, the water table is very close to ground level, but in the Mole Gap, the water table is beneath the modern land surface. And this means that when the river has very little water in it, excess water will flow through fractures in the chalk down into the water-saturated chalk here. And moving north from the Mole Gap towards Leatherhead, still in the chalk, that water then emerges in a line of springs at the permeability barrier between the porous permeable chalk and the London clay. Now, I think many people here must have been down to look the stepping stones and places there to actually see the swallowholes swallowing. And I had hoped that Mark would have been able to go down, shoot some film to show you this afternoon. But unfortunately, it's been rather a wet summer. So I don't think the swallowholes have been swallowing. But they've been identified all the way through the Mole Gap. So this map is a map of the geology of the Mole Gap, and I think you should be comfortable with that. Here's the chalk on the other side. Bradley Farm, which is now Denby's Vineyard. These are the river terrace deposits on either side here and here. And these black dots are the swallowholes that have been identified. And these have been studied in great detail. I've got, afterwards, there's a chance for you to wander around. There's some very nice illustrations here, which are actually colored up better than the ones I'm going to show you now. Many of you, I'm sure if you've got that lovely little book on the history of Surrey, you will have seen some of these drawings of Victorian gentlemen pointing out that's a swallowhole there, Squire. And this is Brayley's History of Surrey, 1849. Another rather more detailed one from a book by Dennis, 1855, identifying swallowholes in a meander of the River Mole. Another Surrey, recent one by Fagg, 1956. And there includes a cross-section there where you can see both the chalk and a little bit of the river valley alluvium and the swallowhole going down there. The swallowholes would initially start in a fracture in the chalk, and then acid rain would gradually enlarge by solution and make these bigger holes. Anyone here from Mickleham? Nobody from Mickleham? Okay, so I will tell you a story, and it must be true. You must believe me. At Mickleham, in the old days, there was a village postman. And the story goes that he was shaving, in the old days of a cutthroat razor probably, and he was shaving, looking into his shaving mirror, which actually he could see through the window at the back of his bathroom. And while he was shaving away, he saw an oak tree 100 yards or so away, and before his very eyes, it slowly sank down and rotated and vanished out of sight down the swallowhole. Now that's true because I told you so. But seriously, this is quite a famous photograph when the Mickleham bypass was being constructed, 1930s. There's an old traction engine that was used for some of the groundworks, and I believe it actually got stuck and ended up down the swallowhole. So there's a big magnetic anomaly remaining there, something that will thrill the archaeologists in millennia to come. Right, now, Google Earth is a wonderful tool for geologists and geographers and the like. This is a Google Earth photograph of the start of Mickleham Bends. So north is up at the top here. Here's the dual carriageway. Here's the railway, and it's just going to go into the tunnel beneath Norbury Hill. And I was looking at this during one of the dry spells. The thing with Google Maps, you can go back through time. If you've noticed this, there are successive satellite photographs. You can actually go right back to 1945, not satellite, but aerial photographs in black and white. So I was looking at photos at Google Earth 2003, and I saw dry summer, fields largely dried out, and every now and again, subcircular green leafy patches. And I had what we call in the trade a geospasm. Those are old abandoned sinkholes plugged up with alluvium. And because the ground there is just slightly depressed, a little bit more moisture, so the grass continues to grow in the drought, whereas the rest of the field is drying out. Isn't that fun? Gave me a big thrill. It's the simple things in life. So, active swallow holes. I'll show you now a series of historical maps. The oldest is 1594, map of John Norden, all of the mole gap showing the state of the river mole. So this is John Norden, 1594, and Norbury here, Poleston, Betchworth, Dorking, Milton, Westcott. And here he writes, the river goeth underground. And he stops the river at Norbury, and it comes up again virtually at what is now the southern end of the Mole Gap. 1610, very famous map of John Speed, the river runneth under, and again, showing much the same, Dorking down here, comes back again. 1690, map of John Selley, the river runneth underground. And you can see again where we are now. Here's Leatherhead, Norbury Place, Norbury Park, Mickleham, and the river now runneth underground until you get to Dorking, and it comes up, surfaces again. Herman Mole, 1724, still the river runneth underground, much the same. So Box Hill's on the wrong side of it, but never mind. Dorking is still there. Map of John Sennex, 1729. No remarks, but there's no river shown between West Hamble and Norbury. That gap there rather shorter than in the previous map, as if the water level is rising, perhaps. And the map of John Rock, 1762. And this is the first map of that chronological sequence, which actually shows the river entire, running all the way continuously from Dorking through Mickleham and all the way north out of the Mole Gap. Map of Lindsay and Crossley, 1793. Again, continuous, no burrowing. And then the last one of the series, and we know this is genuine because this is a government-produced map by the Ordnance Survey. All the Ordnance Survey maps from 1819 onwards show the river mole continuously running all the way from Dorking through to Leatherhead. There are still, in times of drought, the swallow holes are emergent, and you see the river going down the swallow holes, but there is still continuous flow to be seen. Right, you're all locals. How many of you have been down Dorking Caves? Good, quite a good number of you. So you will know most of this story. Dorking, as you may or may not know, is riddled with caves, easily eroded out, excavated in the Folkestone sands of the Lower Greensand. Caves were widely used for storing wine in and for possibly other smuggling and other nefarious purposes. This is a vertical section through the South Street Caves, and I do recommend that you take the tour. You can book online from Dorking Museum. All the cave tours are organized by Dorking Museum, and there are regular tours throughout the season, most of the summer. And at the back are some of the cave guidebooks that you can look at. Okay, so what this is showing is you come into the entrance to the cave is here. There's a right angle gallery going off there. You can walk along and go down the staircase, down and down and down and down and down here. And this is a well shaft. You actually can see two well shafts that were dug right through this cave system. And what is really curious, what I want to concentrate on, is down here, you can actually look inside the well shaft at this point. And here, as you come onto this level surface, is the mystery chamber. And we call it the mystery chamber because we don't know why it was cut. There are various theories. Basically, it's got an arched roof, as you can see there, and there is a circular bench cut out all the way around it. So I'm going to show you some slides of that, but to start with, this is at the entrance of the mystery chamber. It's just off to the left of where this photo was taken. That is looking at a well shaft. And if you were to get in there and look upwards, you'll see right the way up, not quite to the surface because it's blocked off for safety reasons. And there is a legend, they do say, that people have seen a boat in there in the olden days. Now, when I first started going, I was a cave guide for many years. And when I started going down there, I looked at that and I didn't pay it much attention. I thought it was a bit odd. There's some old timber down there. Or maybe somebody, for some reason, had a bonfire or something down there. Didn't make sense. Anyway, the more I looked at it and at the mystery chamber, I realized that that was quite wrong. Now, on this slide, the well shaft is just off to the right of where that photograph was taken. And here we've still got that dark brown stain. And you can see it's a veneer, it's a surface feature. It's just on the cut, eroded surface of the sandstone. It isn't something within the rock itself. Here is the mystery chamber. And it is, you can almost see the top of it there. There is what is very obviously a bench cut out all the way round where people could sit around and they could either perhaps say their prayers. You know, it might have been used by Roman Catholics when the Roman Catholics weren't allowed to worship, or the other way round when the Protestants weren't allowed to worship. We don't know. It could have been used for smugglers to enjoy their illicit brandy and so forth. It could have been done just by a wealthy gent for fun, because there was a phase in the 18th century where gentry would have vineyards and cave systems and grottos. If you've been to Paynes Hill Park, you've seen the whole lot. It could just have been dug as a folly for a gent to take his chums down just to impress them. But here's the funny thing. So this dark brown is just a veneer surface, and it's up there. Let's look at that close too. That is where it's been scratched off by people's heels. But the top of that surface, it's basically composed of what geologists would call limonite, which is a posh word for rust, hydrated iron oxide. So you see, that's the top of this layer of rust. Thinks. That is a paleo water table. That is suggesting to us that at one time, the water got up to that far, and for a period of time, these waters are rich in iron salts, and the iron precipitated out as hydrated iron oxide. Right? So let's work through the sequence of this. The mystery chamber was obviously not cut out when that was the water table level. The water table in this we think is late 18th century, water table must have been below the floor of the mystery chamber. They wouldn't have tried to cut it out half in water, would they? So once upon a time, the water table was down at that depth. Then the water table level rose to that depth for sufficiently long for that iron to precipitate out. And since then, the water table has dropped to expose the floor of the mystery chamber. What we are working out is the paleohistory, the paleohydrology of the River Mole catchment area. Doesn't that sound learned? Tell your chums when you get home after, so what did you learn? I know all about the paleohydrology of the River Mole catchment area. And note that was done without the aid of a computer. It was all done with the eyes and the little grey cells. Isn't that fun? Well, it amuses me. Now, we've looked at how the water goes down. Now, to end up with, we've got to see how it gets out. To the north of Norbury Park, this is a map showing part of the River Mole itself. Thorncroft Vineyards here, Norbury Park, Thorncroft Vineyard, nice little vineyard on an alluvial floodplain. And as we follow the River Mole down, here at Fetcham Ponds, there is a spring. This is Google Earth, good old Google Earth. This is in 1999, Fetcham Ponds, springs, and look at that. It looks like the cone of a volcano. But of course, it's not a volcano of lava, it's a volcano of lime mud, of chalk, where the water has gone down the swallow holes in the Mole Gap and has emerged, and all the chalk has formed a cone, as the water has emerged in that spring. And there is a legend that somebody put a duck down one of the swallow holes at the stepping stones, and it emerged there alive, but minus its feathers. But I must say that legend is told of swallow holes in Derbyshire and many other parts, but it's a shame to ruin a good story. Thought I'd share that with you. So that's 1999. 2003, it's the state of play. There's the vent and all the chalk sedimented there. And the last I think I've got in the sequence, 2009, the spring is still springing, but that nice cone isn't so obvious as it was. And there's a lot of research that could be done here, working out what the water table level has been doing through time. Some of it's related to climate change for sure, but some of it recently, of course, is related to water abstraction, the fact that we're now draining the aquifers for drinking water. Isn't that fun? So for my finale, part 3, the death of the river mole. It will be caused by a combination of 3 processes, only one of which is shown on the screen. The other 2 are down there, so you must believe me when I tell you what they are. Normal geological processes of erosion. You may remember from your GCSE geography lectures years ago, when you have hills above sea level, Mother Nature will gradually weather and erode that rock, take it in rivers and take it down and deposit it under the sea at that base level. So wherever you have a hill, Mother Nature is going to be busily destroying it. Another process that may be acting here, of course, is earth movements, that the earth's crust moves up in some places to form mountains, and it subsides in other places. So that also is going to be a factor that we have to consider when we think of the future of the mole. The bottom one is, of course, climate change, or should we just say sea level change, particularly sea level change, how it could be affected by climate. And we're all now, of course, thinking about global warming. So whatever happens, we know the river mole is going to die in some shape or form. Now, what is the immediate future? Well, if we're lucky, the future of Mole Valley may look something like this. Semi-desert, and instead of making grape wine, we're making legby, which is fermented palm wine. If we're really unlucky, Mole Valley may look like that. And here's a rather nice artist conception. If the royal family lasts into that phase. But of course, there is another danger, and this is the spooky one. That's obviously the Thames Barrier. And if you look at the number of times the Thames Barrier is raised and put in position, 4 times through the 1980s, 35 times in the 1990s, 75 times in the 2000s. You don't need me to tell you what's going on. If they do not reconfigure the Thames Barrier, rebuild it and raise it up very substantially, or build a completely new one further out, much higher, the River Thames is going to breach it and flood huge areas of London. And this is a real possibility. Some of you do you remember Mr. Johnson, Boris Johnson, the Mayor of London? Do you remember Boris Island? He had this great typical Borosian fantasy of Boris Island, where you would develop the whole of the Thames estuary, build houses and factories and all sorts of things. Absolute madness. Every geologist knows the one place you would not choose to develop housing is in the Thames estuary, because we know geologically the southern North Sea has been sinking for the last 50 million years, if not longer. The whole of England is tilting. Devon and Cornwall are the places to retire to. And now I don't know what's happened to this one. You must trust me when I tell you, this is an Environment Agency flood map for 2050, assuming that nothing is done to mitigate flooding throughout England and Wales. And I suspect quite a few of you will have seen this map. By 2050, huge areas of northern Cambridgeshire and southern Lincolnshire will be underwater unless there is mitigation. And huge areas of the Thames Valley, right up and beyond Twickenham, again, will be way below sea level. Sorry about that, and I just hope it doesn't happen to the next. Yes, the same thing's happened on this. I can't think why it hasn't come out, but that shows off the map the River Mole. Now, this is my finale, roll of drums and a fanfare. I've asked experts on global warming, climate change, and sea level change what the predictions are for the rate of rise of sea level. And no surprise there is a range of calculations depending what data you feed into your computer program. You get different results. Now, let me talk you through this. This is sea level, meters above sea level. This is modern ordnance data, modern sea level. Right now at Molesey, the mouth of the River Mole is 7 meters above sea level. This is time, that's 100 years, 200 years, 300. That's a millennium there, 1,000 years. So what I've done, I've taken the most optimistic and the most pessimistic figures I could come across for the slowest and fastest rate of rises in sea level. Plotted them out there, the rise in sea level according to the amount of time. And if we're really lucky, or really unlucky rather, the mouth of the Thames, the mouth of the Mole, where it enters the River Thames, will be a tidal estuary in about 130 years' time. If we're lucky, we'll have to wait for about 300 years before the mouth of the River Mole, where it enters the Thames, is a tidal estuary. That's based on the range of best information that is available at the present time. Makes you think, doesn't it? Whatever happens, whatever humans do, Mother Nature will go on doing her thing. And this basically is what will happen in the end. You're familiar now, and you should be quite comfortable with this lower slide here, the River Mole, the Mole Gap. Over millions of years, the North Downs will be eroded down, the green sand hills will be eroded down, right down to sea level, irrespective of what short-term changes in climate and sea level are. And ultimately, we will have a great surface here, an old erosion surface, what the geologist calls an unconformity, where we have the folded rocks of the Wealden Anticline, and they will be overlain by more sedimentary rocks with different fish, layer after layer after layer of strata deposited on top of the old surface of the Weald. So that's what will be happening or have happened in millions of years' time, irrespective of what we do, what effect we do or don't have on the landscape. So there you are, ladies and gentlemen. That's the birth, life, and death of the River Mole.